Was this week's Righteous Gemstones ridiculous or what? It is where today we're talking about season 3, episode 7, Blood for Blood. And it's a longer title than that, but that's what I'm calling this one, a short one, most definitely. If you don't know who I am, I'm Suzanne Titkemeyer. I used to write a column called No Longer Quivering for Pathos, and it was all about evangelical quiverful and the whole quiverful religion and evangelical in general. I talked about these various types of churches, these types of belief. So what I have been doing with the Righteous Gemstones, I did it a little bit last season. I'm just starting to do it for this season and beyond, is to do a breakdown of the theology. And sometimes there is no theology that I can actually pinpoint in great detail. And that is kind of how it is with this episode, because the theology is more something that is, I'm going to call it side theology because it's not main theology. There are some main theological points of view, but most of it is going to be the side stuff. And this episode was when worldviews collide, is what I'm kind of calling it in my mind, because of all the things that happened. Okay, let's dive right in. We started with Judy at the pharmacy losing her mind because BJ showed up beat up. So she's running in there, cussing her usual way, doing what she does best, which is having a fit, throwing inappropriate things out there. I've always said that Judy Gemstone is my spirit animal. Lord, I hope I never run around screaming quite those obscenities. And then the craziest thing of all happens. The Redeemer shows up, and every time the Redeemer, the huge truck that was Jesse's that he drove back in the day, squashing cars and things, shows up. And every time the Redeemer shows up in this series, this season, I've wanted to scream, "The Redeemer! F yeah!" with devil horns, because it's just so bizarre. And I saw there's going to be this week a documentary release, a little documentary series, not series, but little episode of the place in North Carolina that built the Redeemer. And they had like 3-4 weeks to build this thing and get it up and running. And they did it. They did an amazing job from everything I've seen. So the Redeemer rolled over Judy's car and squashed it. And Judy got kidnapped by the Montgomerys, the sister and brother-in-law of Eli Gemstone, or the Montgomerys. And we've seen them throughout this season, the two sons especially. Big Carl and his brother, and I have to look at my notes because I am terrible with names. Peter is the father. And I want to say Curtis, but I'm not sure that's his name. So Judy got kidnapped. Kelvin got kidnapped. And I laughed at something that came out of the mouth of one of the Montgomerys. Not the Montgomerys, what am I saying? The Lord, out of Jesse's mouth, the Lord's work is never done. That's right, it's sure written. So Jesse is pulling his gun and trying to fight off the Montgomerys that are trying to kidnap him. And it doesn't go real well because they pull out a gun full of tranquilizer darts and shoot him. And we get to see a so funny stoned Jesse Gemstone attempting to be not kidnapped. And that is, to me, one of the funniest sequences I've seen in the show. And the Montgomery church, there, Carl and them, they stuck them in the silo together, all three of them. And it's funny that they would kidnap them at this particular moment, because if you remember at the end of the last episode, Judy and Calvin both quit the church. They quit the ministry. And so they weren't really kidnapped. I guess kidnapping has to do with children. Abductions and ransom have to do with adults mostly, even though ransom can mean anybody. And that brings us to the theme, the theological theme besides good and evil, our worldviews colliding. And that is family, because we get to see in this episode family coming together, pulling apart the strength of bonds, of family bonds. Peter Montgomery believes that he is enacting justice for all the stuff that has happened in the past. Him spending all of their savings buying up the Y2K buckets that Eli Gemstone and Amy Lee were selling and getting caught with that money, spending that money and then having to rob a bank to try to recoup, when he should have just sold the flood buckets back to Eli and he would have been at zero. I mean, he wouldn't have made any money, but he wouldn't have lost any money. And then for a while, nobody realizes they've been abducted. You've got BJ running around screaming that Judy is out there doing her thing with other men, which is not at all what's going on. The first one to really peg what's going on is my series favorite, Keith. Keith. Keith finds Kelvin's Jeep with the door open, his white Jeep. And he's sniffing around and asking the guys at the wood shop, did you see a very handsome man? Because Kelvin's got his little spikes on top, like Mr. Rebellious, like so many people I knew in the early 2000s in the church that were showing their rebellious streaks by squashing their hair up with a lot of products and sometimes with colors. So Keith finds the Jeep and realizes almost immediately that something is amiss and says that he has deduced that Kelvin is not in a good place, that something awful has happened to him. And how right he is. And then we see the family together, or parts of the family, and you've got Gideon, Eli, and Martin, and they've got a ransom CD from the Montgomerys demanding $15 million in ransom, or $5 million per child. May is on the property when this is all going down. And she blames the Gemstone kids for the abduction and the conspicuous consumerism of the entire Gemstone family, the money. We know May has always had a problem with that. Always. And this goes back to the worldview clashes that I was talking about. And then Tiffany makes me laugh. I have a family meeting and Tiffany brings dolls. Tiffany has made these rough looking, almost voodoo doll looking things of the three siblings. She's got a Jessie, she's got a Judy, and she's got a Kelvin. And she hands them out. And it's just a laugh out loud moment. I love Tiffany because she's all about family. She is relentlessly positive in her own weird little way, and I'm here for that. Keith arrives at the family and he's all swole up. I swear I have never seen the actor playing Keith be that jacked and that muscly before, and it's impressive. And then when he approaches the Gemstones, he gets all mystical about things and says how he knows that Kelvin's been taken and that he can sense that Kelvin's in a bad place. And they originally tell Keith, well, you're not family. But BJ, God bless his heart, they're coming back. They've been trimming my tree. The people with the, what do you call it, with the utilities here, they've been trimming my tree. So they just distracted me driving past our gate again. Okay, so where was I? I was talking about Keith and BJ. So BJ says, no, that Keith is family. And I love him for that because Keith is family. We've seen Kelvin bring Keith to the Sunday dinners. We've seen them together like this. Now, I know that one of the big guffaws in the whole show is playing the whole awkward, are they gay or are they not gay, Kelvin and Keith relationship. And I'm not sure. I'm still on the fence of whether they're gay or not, whether they're just the world's most awkward dude bros that love each other platonically. I don't know, and I don't care. I've never cared much about people's sexualities, and I don't really care for the fact that they made the whole are they, aren't they gay thing a laugh point. I just love Keith, and I like him and Kelvin together. So the militia gets all stirred up. The Montgomery militia, when Peter is feeding them a bunch of nonsense and they start shooting at the sky, they have a church service. They make Jesse and the siblings preach the sermon, and it doesn't go well. All it does is anger the militia types that um, Peter Montgomery is living in the woods with without modern conveniences at all, and he's got his church service. Peter throws shade at all the kids and says that Eli used money alone to raise them. And there's some truth to that. Eli and Amy Lee overindulge our children with money, most definitely. But you have to consider that they were raised without much money, both of them. And I've seen this happen many times with people who become mega rich after having been raised with nothing. The next generation gets all the stuff that they themselves were denied. And I think that that's all we're seeing. Plus, it takes time and intentionality to run that type of religious organization, high demand religion organization. So I'm not excusing Eli and Amy Lee, but I'm just saying this is pretty understandable. And then Peter brings out the snakes because apparently Peter's church is a snake handling, fire water drinking, strange place. So he tries to get the gemstone kids near the snakes, and they're all freaking out like any normal, rational person would be if you shoved a rattlesnake in their face. Eli refuses to pay. He says no, he's not paying the ransom. We have some really funny guffaws when crazy things happen, like Kelvin. He can't move his bowels with his sibling sitting right there. And Jesse Gemstone's sideburns start leaking dark dye, just like when Rudy Giuliani was speaking in that time and he was sweating and the dye was just rolling off his head. Very similar laugh. And then we see the Gemstones having a prayer session. All of those that are, I don't want to say defrauded, but without their significant others or child or whatever, they're holding hands and they're calling for whatever. And it's actually a pretty funny thing because the prayer is so revealing of their inner personalities. I mean, Keith was praying that Calvin would have natural aloe wipes so that his rectum didn't get wrecked. And Amber seemed like she was praying in such a way she was eager to pull out her weapons and try them out. So that's what I mean. And it was just a sweet scene, except for the fact that it was just so weird. But so much about the Gemstones is so weird and so right. And we got to see a lot of siblings coming together in this episode. And then there's a sequence that makes you think that May is in on the kidnapping. And next thing you know, she's in a car and she's running off of the compound. She's running off of Montgomery family compound, and someone is following her. The siblings all have regrets. They talk about their regrets. They have a big bonding thing and say they love each other. You almost never see in this show somebody said that they love each other, at least who are blood related. So that was actually kind of nice. So we discover that the person following May to the Montgomery compound is Gideon. Gideon, who've not seen much this season, except lounging around in like a $300 robe, wearing a collar around his neck. The actor was actually harmed in the neck when he was having a massage from his hairdresser on the set of another project. So we haven't seen much of him as a result, that he's been wearing the collar. Now, a little birdie told me that whenever there's something like that going on with an actor, they write it into the script to keep that person there. And I can see that. So Gideon arrives while right at the end of another of Peter's church services. And Peter has already declared that he's going to kill the siblings, kill one of them, right after the service to make Eli loosen up with the money. So he says he's going to kill one of them, and then Eli will pay up because he'll know that Peter is serious. So Gideon arrives and he's creeping through the compound. And the church is singing the craziest song of all time. Now, I've been involved with church worship off and on for many, many long years. And I've got to say, in the time that I've been doing this, and there have been weird songs, this is the weirdest of the weird. One time we sang Shake It Off at the Methodist church, talking about, because the sermon was all about dealing with the slings and arrows of life and the things people say. It's like, shake it off, you know. And one time we sang the Jackson 5's I'll Be There, which was a particularly awkward time, because that time the woman who was supposed to sing lead had a mental breakdown and ran off the stage before we even started singing. So the leader looked at me and I had to step up and start singing the song. Fortunately for me, I knew it because I'm so old, I'd been alive during the 70s when that was a hit. So what are they singing? They're not singing any pop song necessarily, and they're not singing anything like those evangelical standards that you hear everywhere. Our God is an awesome God. You don't hear any of that. They're not singing that. They're not singing to God, about God. They're not doing anything like that. They're not even singing any of those sneaky backdoor God songs like Burn the Ships by Burn the Ships by For King and Country. They're not singing anything sneaky. They're just singing this country song about all the gold in California. So I laughed so hard over that they were singing this silly song about the riches of the world corrupting you. And there's a lot of truth to that. There is some of that. And then it turns out that I was mistaken. It's May May to the rescue. Carl called May May. There is a standoff between the families, and then Gideon shows up and Redeemer, F yeah. And he just starts wrecking them. He wrecks all their things. He takes out the outhouse with somebody sitting in it. He takes out their windmill pump. He takes out everything with that thing, and he's driving it like crazy. And I knew as soon as I saw Redeemer in episode 1 of this 3rd season that we were likely going to see Gideon, the expert driver, driving the Redeemer. After all, Gideon had been a stuntman for a very short period of time in Hollywood, and he obviously has the skills. And we saw him last year with the motorcycle doing all kinds of crazy stunts and things. And then I had a feeling, and it was a good payoff, because when he showed up with the Redeemer, of course, I'm going, ah! In the background, screeching and carrying on and just laughing so hard. I was crying my eyes out almost. I was laughing so hard. May May starts driving them all off the compound, including Big Carl, when, of course, some of the guys who are with her husband, Peter Montgomery, show up and they try to stop them. But Gideon shows up and the Redeemer, F yeah, and wrecks their stuff. And May May drives everybody off. Gideon follows in the Redeemer after he has completely wrecked their S. He has wrecked their SHIT. And again, I was laughing so hard. It was one of the best episodes of the Righteous Gemstones I have ever seen. And that's saying something, because they just keep topping themselves. So I'm going to go back now and talk a little bit about the theology behind all this, because Like I said, it was the clash of the worldviews, and it was family this week more than anything else. Family. Family is something that's kind of problematic for many of us. People that you're supposed to be the closest with, but you're sometimes fighty and bitey with on both sides, both the siblings, the Gemstone siblings, Jesse, Judy, and Kelvin, and the whole Eli and Amy Lee versus May May and Peter Montgomery. Peter is gone all out survivalist now, and somebody said in one of the Reddit threads that Peter thinks that Eli is the devil. No, it goes beyond that. It's not just that he thinks Eli is the devil. He opposes everything that Eli stands for. The God that Peter knows is a judge that you should be fearful of at all times, that you should fear God and be in awe of him, and you should live as humbly as possible. And you see this a lot in churches where there's not anyone very successful, there's not a lot of money going around. They take this stance a lot of times, particularly like in the IFB, the Independent Fundamentalist Baptist realm and beyond. They act like God is eager to punish you all the time, and the best way to avoid that is to be as humble and poor and everything as possible. And I've seen some crazy humble bragging over poverty in my old church, because we had a certain contingent there that thought that way. And then you had your contingent that we're successful, yeah, like Eli and them. So this worldview and how you view God a lot of times depends upon what your own view of life is, and whether or not you're scrambling and scrapping for money and food, and whether you have food insecurity, whether you don't have a safe place to stay. I saw in my old church people living in some really kind of, I'm going to say, borderline type situations. There was one lady I knew, and she was extremely jealous of all of us, and she acted a lot like May May and looked a little bit like May May. She lived in a mobile home that for about 3 months, one of the walls was missing. One of the outer walls was completely gone, and she had to have that repaired. It was quite expensive. And she had to scrap and save for that. And they had a sheet of this clear, one of those plastic sheets, shutting out the outdoors in the house. And I can't imagine what that would be like. But she was very unpleasant about it, just like the Montgomerys. I remember one time hosting a worship team meeting at my house, a fall fellowship, and she got mad at me over toilet paper. She told me I was wasting God's resources, his money, by buying Charmin. And I remember being so incredibly puzzled by that. But it comes down to the same thing. It's worldview, how much money you have, how you view money. Is money a tool, or is money your entire focus? Or is money not important at all because you don't have it? That's what we're looking at here. We're looking at fundamentalism in its most fundamental form versus evangelicalism in its highest form, where you have the Joel Osteens of this world that have oodles of dough and aren't afraid to flash it or spend it. Now, I'm not saying that either side is right, because clearly neither side is. And it's better to be somewhere comfortably in the middle. It's better to be comfortable. It just is. Because both sides, as we can clearly see in this week's episode, their money or lack of money has not helped them in any way. If anything, it's hindered them in their development as human beings. Hey, that's all I got this time. I'm going to put a link in the description below to the interview about the Redeemer, documentary. I'm sorry. And I cannot wait for the next episode. We're getting the season finale. It's actually 2 episodes, two for one. And then sadly we'll be over. And then I can concentrate on going back and doing all the rest of the episodes. So that's all I got today. And enjoy yourself. Have a day run around the house with a pickle in your mouth if you feel like it. swim in the creek and grab you a pie off the windowsill. Love you guys. I'll see you at some point down the road. Hopefully, Telecable lets me keep my internet now.